Welcome to CISO's Insiders Podcast, powered by GRC Consulting. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing leading CISOs and security leaders in the industry for light, eye-level conversations. Here, they share advice and tips, talk about their biggest accomplishments and failures, favorite drinks, key influencers, and much more. We encourage you to walk away with at least one insight that will help you better yourself or your business. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more content, please check us out on social media.
Welcome, everybody. Today I will be speaking to Jared Ablon, who is currently the CEO and founder of HackEDU, an interactive training platform for secure development training. But prior to this current role, Jared was actually the CISO of a company called Airmap for a few years. Before that, he was working for MITRE Corporation, where he led efforts to ensure security of communication technologies for multiple U.S. Air Force programs. And I think prior to that, you were working for the U.S. government. So if you wanted to step in and properly introduce yourself, I would be more than happy.
Yeah, I think you covered the basics. So I'm currently the co-founder and CEO at HackEDU, secure coding training platform. Prior to that, I was the CISO at Airmap, which is a company that is building air traffic control for drones. And so I was there for several years. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing there is the company, they realized early on if they were going to do this, that cybersecurity was something that was important for them. So it's kind of unique being brought in as a CISO as early as I was, which is not typical. And then I spent time at MITRE Corporation in cybersecurity, and then prior to that, the U.S. government. So my total time in security has been around 17 years.
Okay, impressive. 17 years, yeah. I've been in the market for 21, I think, so we're almost the same in that sense. So yeah, and before we get started, I always like to give a brief introduction. And basically, this podcast is mostly around you. It's not about technical issues around cybersecurity or compliance. It's not about the product or the product of the companies that you were working with. It's mostly about you and your journey. And in order to accomplish that, I found that it's beneficial to always try to do like a few quick questions just to break the ice. Could you provide some information about your marital status?
I am happily married for a decade now, so 10 years.
Okay, no one ever said that they were unhappily married, so I have to say that. And what about your favorite drink?
Currently, I think it's white tea. I've been getting into different kinds of teas, and I think white tea is my go-to.
Okay, interesting. White tea. I'll have to look that up. Okay, and let me just dive right in. If there's one thing you wish you'd known before you began your career, what would that be?
I think one thing that would have been helpful is to know there's many different paths to an end goal in a career, right? So there's the path of working hard and working your way up in one company, right? If a CISO, say, for example, is a goal for someone, they can work their way up in one company for years and years and go that route. There's a route of getting in, like I did, with an earlier stage company, and jumping in as a CISO there. I mean, so for example, when I was the CISO at Airmap, I was very qualified to be the CISO at Airmap. However, would I have gotten a job as a CISO at a Fortune 100? No, probably not, right? But it gave me a place where I could stretch myself and grow. And then at that point, I could have gone on to bigger CISO roles from there. So I think just understanding that, there's many different paths to a destination, and so understanding all of the potential options.
Mm-hmm. But would you go to the extent of saying that an individual needs to strategize before beginning his career path?
I don't think an individual needs to necessarily strategize. I mean, I had no plan, right? I knew the job I was going to take out of college, but I didn't know where that would take me. I just knew, as long as, you know, someone's in a role where they can learn and grow and stretch themselves, then there's value there, right? And obviously enjoy it. I think those things are extremely important. So I don't think you need a strategy for your whole career mapped out, but I think understanding, am I going to go to this next position and learn and grow and get something out of it?
Yeah, and that makes sense. And looking back at the 17 years that you've been in the industry, what would you say your biggest failure was, and what did you take out of it?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say this is my biggest failure, but it's definitely one that that comes to mind and sticks in my mind. It was, I was pretty much fresh out of college, had my first job. I was sitting on a Linux machine and had many terminals open. One of which was SSH'd into a server, and some others that were local. And what I did was I hit, I thought I was on a machine, my local machine, and I did, RM minus R star, right? So basically, for people who don't know, basically delete everything. And so I thought I was locally, I was on the remote server, and I was in a root directory, and it started taking a long time. I was like, why is this taking so long? I don't have that many files. And then I realized that I was actually on the server instead of my local machine. So, obviously that was difficult, and even more difficult once I stopped it was having to go to my management and letting them know that I had done this on a server. So that was very difficult. I think from that failure, what I learned was several things. Number one is, it was definitely the right thing to go to my management rather than try to, even though I wanted to duck out and kind of hide and be quiet about it, it was definitely the right thing to do. And doing that is important. And then, paying attention to detail and really, having attention to detail in all work that you do is extremely important. And so I definitely am, much more attentive to detail now. Obviously, I was very junior in my career then, but having that is important.
Yeah, that brings me back to similar experiences I had. I remember one time in a bank server's room where I got the note to restart the server, and me and my teammate, we went ahead and did that, and just like 2 minutes after that, someone came in and told us, look, this was a production system, people are working on it. There were that was like the stock exchange system basically, so there were so many transactions there, and that caused a huge loss. But anyway, I think we learned something from that. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and having touched on that, what would you say your biggest accomplishment was?
And so, going along with that, one thing I also learned from that experience was you can recover from that, right? I mean, obviously, some of my peers would joke and call me RM star and things like that, but as long as you work hard and do good work, you can recover from those things, and that won't be the last thing you're remembered by. And so, in that office, when I worked for the government, there were some really big, national security problems that I helped solve. So I think those are some of my bigger accomplishments. Outside of that, I think my current role right now as a CEO and creating jobs and an impact is my biggest accomplishment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and looking back at your role as a CISO, if someone were to want to pursue a career that's similar to yours, and I think you touched on that in the first question, but what would your advice would be to them? What should they do in order to occupy the position of the CISO at some point in their career?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing where people who are not CISO or not close to working with the CISO sometimes don't understand is that the CISO role is a lot of politicking. It's not necessarily this this highly technical role where you're going to be doing technical things. So I think understanding that that it's a management role and that you maybe don't want to jump into that role too early, or but someone who wants to get into it, I think obviously putting yourself in situations where you're constantly learning, understanding, learning different aspects of security. Right now, security is really about specializations. There's just so many different areas of security, and trying to get as much experience as you can in some of those different areas, so you have a good broad understanding of security, how it works, and then working on some of those management skills on how do you work with people, how are you going to ask for more resources and more budget, how are you going to manage people, all of those things as well. So for me, it wasn't one necessary one path, but it was kind of a cumulative of all the experience I had prior that set me up for being able to be successful in the CISO role.
Mm-hmm. And when you occupied that position, did you report to management, or were you under IT or development?
Yeah, so I was, when I started, so this is, as I mentioned, this is very unique. When I started as a CISO at Airmap, I was employee number 6, right? So there's not many CISOs that got brought in as employee number 6. It's very, very unique and rare. So at that point, I was put under the CEO, and then I stayed as the company grew, to much larger numbers. I stayed under the CEO the entire time.
Okay, but in some organizations, the CISO is actually, like, in some places it's part of IT or engineering. Do you have any thoughts about that? Like, can you assume what are the pros and cons for that position to be under, like, such an IT, like an IT department?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the problem is, security in some sense is going to want to have these organizations, IT or development, right, under the CTO or under the CIO, is going to want these organizations to do things, right? And when your boss is the person who runs that organization, it makes it difficult to watch over them and make sure they're doing the right things. And you're asking for budget and you're telling them things to do, and it makes it very difficult, right? Now, the potential is, if you're under the CTO or the CIO and you're at a tech company, they probably have a very large budget, right? And so maybe you can tap into that budget. So that's a pro there. But the con is it's definitely, hard to be independent and, give exactly the advice and make those tough decisions and tell your manager difficult things. So I've seen it not work incredibly well. So I think obviously reporting to the CEO is great, but I know that CEO that can be very difficult. But even reporting to like the CFO or someone who manages risk is a much better fit for the within organizational structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just based on my understanding, so the fact that you were employee number 6 basically means that they wanted you to be a part of the development, right? They wanted your input on their offering, their product and service, correct?
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a product security component to it, definitely.
Okay, got it. And a lot of CISOs, I think, are self-learners, self-thinkers. Could you name like a few best resources that have helped you along the way?
Well, definitely the internet. I mean, the internet is a vast pool of resources. Obviously, filtering it can be difficult, but Twitter is an amazing tool. You can find experts in no matter what field and follow them and get their take on things. And it's free. It's actually incredible if you find and follow the right people. So I found that a good and useful tool. As far as books, there are, I think there's good technical books on security out there, not as much in terms of, CISO and kind of that role. But I think, those are some of the areas that I've kind of stayed on top of and used.
Hmm. Yeah. I think personally, I know a lot of my colleagues read a lot of, technical books and books about cybersecurity and etc. I don't think I've ever read a book about that. I spend my time reading books either for leisure or like business related books. But I just find it. I don't find it that interesting, to tell the truth. I mostly learn online as well.
Yeah.
Could you name a few individuals that have been the most influential to you?
Yeah. So, with this question, so I'm not the type of person who's influenced very easily. I'm influenced by more facts and digging in, right? So people kind of, I'll take advice and things that people tell me and kind of dig in a little bit more. And so yeah, I think that I actually get that from my father. He was an attorney, someone who would question things and kind of look into different things. So I say he's been influential in that respect. But for the most part, like I said, I'll follow people on Twitter. I'll do a lot of research online, but it's less about certain individuals and more collectively, what am I hearing from people? And I think that's been most influential, especially when you think about different vendors and who to look at and what to use for products. A lot of that comes from cumulatively from a lot of different people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you intake a lot of data, you process it, and you make your own mind, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there any one common myth about the CISO profession or the cybersecurity field that you wanted to debunk?
So, I think, obviously outside of cybersecurity, the profession, right? Non-technical people, I think they kind of have a skewed view of what organizations, how they deal with cybersecurity. I think, internally at a lot of companies, security is a very messy thing. It's not something where you're like, oh, it's this massive company, they're on top of cybersecurity. Just the lack of resources in cybersecurity, both money and human capital, makes it a very difficult field. And so a lot of companies that people think, oh, they have their stuff together, cybersecurity is great there. They don't always, and not to say that they're not trying as hard as they can, but it's just a very difficult role.
Yeah, yeah. And I think messy sums it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can in your experience, from your previous positions, what do you think are the main concerns of CISOs what are the main concerns that CISOs have nowadays?
Yeah, I think the biggest, like I mentioned just previously, is the lack of resources, right? It's just, not enough money, not enough human capital. I don't think I've ever met a CISO that is that says they don't need any more resources, that they're good where they're at. There's always more to do. As I mentioned, it's a very difficult role. There's no one thing that kind of fixes everything. There's no one product or one way of doing things. And so because of that, it is a very difficult role. And I think all CISOs are really concerned with just a lack of resources, making sure they have enough resources to be doing what they need to be doing in their roles.
Okay. And, going back to your position as a CISO, could you share what did your day look like? What was your daily routine back then?
Yeah, so I definitely, and I think I definitely try to stay on top of cybersecurity news and what's going on and different threats and things like that. So CyberWire was definitely a big one for me, because it kind of pulled in a bunch of happenings in the security field. So that was always important to kind of keep on top of. My role as a CISO, as you mentioned, was product security focused. So obviously, helping with application security and making sure we had enough resources there. That was a big focus. Obviously, Corporate security was another aspect of it, so making sure we were doing all the right things there. But I mean, really, what it came down to, was making sure we had the basics in place. When you start at an earlier stage company, and even as you grow, making sure you have the basics in place, and then it can scale with your organization, right? Things like single sign-on, two-factor authentication for things, security awareness training. And then doing the right things in terms of a secure software development lifecycle on the product side.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was about managing that. Obviously, priorities were all over the place, and I was also, I was being a thought leader in the field of drones and drone security, and helping to propose, like remote identification for drones and things like that. And so I was a part of those things as well. So it was definitely a lot going on. I definitely didn't have enough resources the whole time I was there, but that's startups in general.
Yeah. And can I just assume right now, because we don't really know each other, but can I assume that that experience, that you experienced some kind of like a pain point in and around the SDLC space that triggered you to basically go out and found your own company?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the time, the hands-on like online training, just really didn't exist. There's always been, good in-person hands-on training, but it's very expensive. It doesn't scale. It wasn't great. Application security is something I had to focus on in that role. And prior to that, I was working on application security for GPS systems for the Air Force. And so I saw a lot of the ugly when it comes to application security. And so I saw there's definitely an opportunity to do much better in terms of setting developers up for success with really great training that can actually reduce vulnerabilities in software.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, thank you. And in your opinion, and I'm assuming you still talk to a lot of colleagues and CISOs in the industry. Do you think there was any major change in terms of budget planning if we compare 2021 to 2020 or even to 2019?
Yeah, so what I saw was, there was definitely a hesitancy once everything happened with COVID, right, at the end of Q1. There was definitely a hesitancy on the part of security and just in general budget planning. Everyone was kind of like, I have no idea what's going to happen. Let's kind of freeze and reassess. After that period happened, then it basically came back. The cybersecurity spending was pretty similar for the most part. Obviously, there were some industries that were more affected that didn't quite come back, right? Like the travel industry, they weren't spending their security budget as they were in the past, but a lot of other companies were. And so I think it was, very similar to 2019. It just kind of had a different, flow of how that budget was being allocated and when it was being allocated. And I think in 2021, I think, so far it's been pretty strong. And I think as things start opening up in the US and around the world, I think security budgets are even going to get bigger, because I think there's going to be a boom in the economy once things start opening up more and more.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and would you say that more budget will be allocated nowadays because of the hybrid, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the way
Like
businesses are now.
remote work.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
remote work.
Yeah, I think there definitely is more budget for things like that, and trying to make sure that people can work home effectively and still maintain a high level of security. So I think that is a part of it. And so there has been, for some companies, an increase in budget. But I think more and more, I mean, we'll see what happens in terms of companies, if they go back to the office or not, and what they decide to do. I assume it will be some hybrid, and that, security spending for a hybrid model and making sure that everything is secure in that sense will probably go up a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when like asking a CISO, like what they like most about vendors, and if you were, if you can put yourself in the shoes of a vendor, as a CISO, what's the one promise that you make to yourself that you will never do?
Well, so the interesting thing, obviously, now I am a vendor, right? So I'm on the other side of the table, but I used to hate vendor sales pitches, right? And I still do, but what I've learned from being on the vendor side of the table is that it's really about trying to solve problems, right? So if you're actually solving a problem, then selling is not bad, but the problem is there is a lot of junk out there, and a lot of junk is being sold on security people, right? A lot of snake oil, and so that makes it really really difficult. Yeah, and so yeah, I mean, it's tough. I definitely see both sides. I know CISOs are inundated with pitches about products, and it's hard to wade through what works and what doesn't, and measure. How do you measure what works and what doesn't? And so it's definitely difficult for CISOs to navigate.
Yeah, but on the flip side, now that you're in the seat of a vendor, you know that that you want to build an organization that's able to scale up. So at some point, some organizations would create this junk that you're speaking about, right? So I think there's a fine balance here, like between what's really adding value as opposed to just creating too much noise, basically. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, when I said junk, I mean junk products, but there are junky ways to sell, right? Definitely. There was a vendor that I told no, and they would literally call me every day, and every time I would say no, I'm not interested, and they just would keep calling and calling. That is too much. Or if you're breaking certain other things, I've seen vendors that would find personal emails and cell phones and try to get a hold of people that way, or do a little too much creeping online. So that's when it kind of crosses the line.
Yeah, and actually, that might be aligned with my next question, unless you have another specific example here. What was the most annoying sales pitch that you've encountered as a CISO?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you tell someone no, that you're not interested, and they just continually call and call and call, that's definitely that's very annoying, and that definitely crosses the line.
Yeah, but when you occupied that seat of a CISO, what was it that you were looking for in a vendor, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I was always looking for a vendor that would solve a problem that I have. Personally, I would usually do a lot of research prior to reaching out to a vendor. So I would have a very good idea of the product and what I'm looking for. And I would not like when you talk to a vendor for the first time and they want to ask you 20 questions and they want to know all about you. And it's like, no, I know about the product. I know what I need. I just want very specific questions answered, right? I want pricing. I want, can I get a trial and try it out? I want, very specific questions. So I think in looking for a vendor, I want a vendor that works with me and my personality in terms of how I want to be sold, versus saying, I'm going to put you in a box and I'm going to ask you, 20 questions no matter what. I remember there was one salesperson I was talking to, and they, I was like, no, you don't need to ask me questions. Here's my questions. Let's just kind of move forward. And I mean, I was ready to make a purchase, but they just kept wanting to ask the same questions over and over again because that was their process and they didn't know anything outside of that process.
Okay, thank you.
So.
And looking back at that period of time in your life, were there, and I know you said you're not really easily influenced by individuals, but were there any like CISOs out there that you were like really looking up to?
Yeah, I mean, so there was a group of security leaders, and I'm based in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles area. We would get together and kind of talk through different problems and things like that. So I think that group was really good. Currently, there's obviously a lot of CISOs that are a lot bigger on social media and people know about, but there's a lot of CISOs that are more quiet and are really focused on their organization and solving their problems. There's a lot of them out there that are really doing amazing things, even though you might never hear about them. And so those are the CISOs that I tend to gravitate towards because they're really focused, internally on solving their problems. And I work with several now that I think are pretty amazing.
Okay. So just for to enlighten our listeners, what would be the best way to connect with you online? Is it LinkedIn, Twitter, any other social media platform?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. That's a great way to connect with me. Jared Ablon, and then email is always good as well. Jared at HackEDU.com. So
Okay,
always happy to chat with people.
great, great. Um, what would you say was the single most important thing to you in your career?
I think the most important thing is enjoying what I'm doing. There have been times in my career where I got into a role and it was good for a little while, and then it stopped being enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I realized was the percentage of my time that I spend working is just too high to do something that I don't like. And so if I get to a point in a certain role or a certain career path that I don't like, it's time to look for something else and really stretch myself, try to learn more. Those are things that are really important to me. I mean, I know a lot of people who they they count their days until retirement, right? Which is great, but it's you should enjoy the journey along the way. It's not just about the destination.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I like the fact that you're quoting Aerosmith here. But I think it's a common theme of when I talk with CISOs, to mention the passion. That passion is an integral part, and if you don't have that, so you'd be burned out, basically.
Yep,
But
for sure.
okay, so before.
And even if you have the passion, you can still burn out on the
Yeah, you could say
CISO
burnout.
role.
Yeah, of
It's
course.
very very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So just a couple of not a couple of more questions before we can wrap this up. If you had unlimited funds, what would you do with your life?
I mean, I think first I would take just a little vacation, just take a break, take a breather. Definitely spend, a bit more time with family, and then, probably would start another company. There's a lot of interesting problems to be solved right now, in many different areas, and definitely in security. Security still has a lot of problems to kind of tackle, and so I would probably, start another company there. It's what I enjoy and what I'm passionate about.
Okay, great. And just like for a final question here, do you have like anything that you've listened to, watched recently that has inspired you and you want to share? I mean, it can also be like a favorite book or anything like that.
Yeah, so I mean, recently listened to Tim Ferriss has a podcast. There's an interesting one with Balaji on it, and he kind of talked about very interesting things happening in the decentralized technology space, right? With blockchain and cryptocurrency and things like that. And I think there's a lot there that security can learn from. And so to me, that was pretty interesting. So I'd
Mhm.
recommend that podcast
Okay.
if you're looking for something interesting to listen to.
So that was Tim Ferriss, and what was the name of the episode? Did you know?
Balaji is Balaji. He's
Okay.
he was a CTO at Coinbase for a little bit, and then worked at as an investor at Andreessen Horowitz for a little bit as well.
Okay, thank you. And so let me just take this opportunity to thank you for taking the time. I do think you have a unique story to tell that might resonate with a lot of our listeners. The fact that you grew in the security industry, but then you moved at some point to the vendor side. I think that that provides like a meaningful insight and experience share. So hopefully that would resonate. And yeah, just thank you again for taking the time to be on this podcast, Jared.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yeah, same here.